The DS is probably one of, if not the largest libraries I own. It was during the DS era that I began really exploring and expanding my library thanks to the internet being firmly a major part of my life, and a resource for discovering what games were out there. This was a really long period of time, 2004 to 2013, and during this time I lived out my entire teen years and became a young adult, so it was an extremely formative time in terms of which games I grew to enjoy and what became my taste in games for the rest of my life. I've also covered a prolific number of DS games in my videos, whether they be Pokemon games or games for my massive Games for Girls video. So unlike other systems, the majority of what I have to talk about in today's video is games. And as usual, a lot of them are really weird and not what collectors typically go for. And I have so many stories to tell about how this strange hodgepodge of stuff all came together. So strap in, because this one is going to be a doozy. Of course, there can't be a game library though without systems to play them on. I wish I had a nicer selection to show you today, but I think the DS might be one of the most fragile consoles that ever existed, and I gave both of my systems a lot of use. This big old crunchy silver console was the model available at launch, and I managed to keep it in decent shape for a long time, but in my most recent move somehow the hinge broke. Pretty much everyone I know who had a DS Lite had a problem with the hinge breaking and the shoulder buttons failing, and my black one is no exception. I actually had to replace the stylus because my original got so beat up that it would no longer lock in place into the system. I got this set of third-party rainbow replacement styluses back in the day at GameStop to solve that problem, and I recently ended up with this bizarre pen-like DS stylus as well. At least the 3DS is backwards compatible, so if I need to do any DS gaming these days, I typically play it on one of my 3DS systems instead. But maybe I'll give these two consoles a little TLC now that I'm more confident with home repair and modification. This was the point where I was a little more conscious of money as I got older, so I stopped trying to get every single iteration of every system and just stuck with what worked. So I never got a DSi. I got this carrying case on eBay from a seller who specialized in Japanese box games and accessories. It's a licensed DS-era Pokemon case from Japan. But again, I used it really heavily through the DS and 3DS eras as a to-go case for my systems, so it has definitely seen better days. I don't even know where to begin with games, so let's start with what we know best. Pokemon. Of course I have my original retail copies of some games like Dash, Diamond, Pearl, Blue Rescue Team, Ranger, Trozei, White, and even this lovely box copy of Heart Gold. But this is where it stops being so straightforward. I never got a copy of Platinum for myself when it was new, because as you probably know too well by now, I was less than thrilled with Diamond and Pearl when they came out, and didn't have any desire to revisit Sinnoh. So my first copy of Platinum was actually this Japanese copy sent in by a viewer to my P.O. box. They sent it along with a ton of Gen 5 Japanese goodies like candy and posters, and I'll never forget their generosity. It was extremely sweet. When I was originally going through and making reviews of Pokemon games almost 10 years ago now, I obviously didn't have a copy of Platinum for the Gen 4 review I actually did plan on making at the time. So my dear friend and now writing partner Vidit sent me his copy of Platinum so I could record a playthrough for footage. Well, you know how prompt I ended up being on that one. By the time I actually made the review, he didn't want it back anymore and told me I could keep it. But if he ever changes his mind, he knows where to find me. By the time White 2 came out, I was a young adult living on my own for the first time, and I did not have a budget for leisure. I was making money off of YouTube, but at the time it wasn't enough to live on, and I ended up having to take a second job for a while. So I had an audience really eager to hear my thoughts on White 2, but I knew I wouldn't be able to get a copy until it went down in price, which Pokemon games actually used to do back then. Luckily, a small gaming store in California emailed me offering me a copy of the game in exchange for giving their store a shout out. I hope they got a lot of business from that one, because they sent me what is now one of my favorite games of all time. So hey, if you're still out there, thanks Game Alley in Castro Valley, California. We've actually been playing through White 2 on my Twitch lately, so if you'd like to hear me live review the game and screech about Gen 5, you should join us. My streaming schedule is in the video description. So that accounts for one copy of White 2, but what about the others? Well, remember how I mentioned that Pokemon games used to actually go down in price after they'd been out for a while? A few years later, I was in college, and one of my classmates ran up to me and told me that White 2 had gone on clearance at the downtown Portland Target for $11. I rushed down there after class and snagged up a couple copies, because at the time I was constantly needing to replay White 2 for footage for the top 10s I was always making, and I had invested way too much time into my main copy to erase the save file. What's funny is I'm pretty sure I never mentioned my channel or Pokemon to that guy, and he never talked to me about Pokemon, so I have no idea how he knew to tell me about the sale, but it was really awesome of him. Both Black and Black 2 never went on clearance though, so on my tighter budget I never did end up getting my own copies. Soul Silver is another one of those too good to be true stories. This story is just like the story for my sealed copy of Drill Dozer. 99 Gamers had paid me to go shopping on their site for a brand deal, and Soul Silver with its case and Pokewalker were among the games I managed to snag. Again, this game was never being listed for actual money, so I don't have any reason to believe it's counterfeit, and the Pokewalker would be pretty hard to fake. The person who listed it was compensated with the on-site currency they were going to get for it in the first place, so I really hope they were able to trade up and get something they really truly wanted from the site. But yeah, I can't help but feel like some of my good luck back then was way more than I deserved. By the way, I somehow ended up with 3 Pokewalkers. I have no idea how that happened. A viewer from Australia sent me this boxed Pokemon typing adventure to my P.O. box, and so many other viewers have sent me other loose games over the years too, like this copy of Pearl, Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Sky, and I think this loose copy of White is Chaz's. Thanks everybody for the support and for sending me these games over the years. I really appreciate them still even to this day. So that's Pokemon games out of the way, but what about the rest of my library? During the DS era, I actually started reading Nintendo Power from time to time, and a few games intrigued me enough for me to check them out. Animal Crossing Wild World was my first entry into the Animal Crossing series. Nintendogs Lab and Friends was like a staple of the DS library, and it was novel at the time that all the television spots for the game featured female players, which I liked. Finally, Field of Magic XYXX had an interesting art style and it seemed too weird not to try it out. The sequel for this one is called Rub Rabbits. This was also the first time I had a friend group that played video games, at least online, so I was introduced to a lot of games through them. Dragon Quest IX, The World Ends With You, and Mega Man Star Force 3 were all games that I got to play with my friends, and a few ended up being my all-time favorites. Years later, we ended up hunting down another copy of Dragon Quest IX so Chaz could try it too, since it has some cool multiplayer co-op features. I also got this Ace Attorney game knowing that it's a series that Vidit really likes, only to find out after the fact that this is a really bad place to get into the series, so I never started it. Someday I'll figure it out. There are a couple of non-Pokemon games in here that were sent by viewers as well. This copy of Mass Attack was actually the very first thing anyone had ever sent me, all the way back from my LiveJournal days. They sent me a Waddle Dee plush as well, which is the one you see back here in all of my videos. It's a great Kirby game and I love it a lot. I believe this copy of My Japanese Coach was also something sent in by a viewer. A lot of the games in here are Chaz's, since he had a sizable DS library of his own before he moved in. Drawn to Life 2, Meteos, WarioWare DIY, Rhythm Heaven, Kirby Canvas Curse, and Children of Mana are all his. He introduced me to a lot of these games, and I like most of them. Rhythm Heaven, which I for some reason ended up with 2 copies of, is now one of my all-time favorite series, and I have Chaz to thank for introducing me. I also got this copy of Park Patrol after Chaz introduced me to Chibi Robo on the GameCube. A good half of the DS games I own I got because I needed to cover them in the Games for Girls video, or planned to cover them in subsequent similar videos that never got off the ground. So I have a lot of weird shovelware. I think that reflects the actual percentage of the DS catalog itself that's weird shovelware, maybe. Believe it or not, I do not own every single Imagine game. These are just the ones I could find at secondhand game stores around the greater Portland area. I do think I own pretty much every DS game in the Mama series. In fact, I somehow ended up with 2 copies of the original Cooking Mama, and I'm not sure how that happened. Barbie Groom and Glam Pups I picked up before I had a set criteria for the Barbie games being made before a certain date to qualify for the video, and Style Savvy I planned to cover at one point as a follow-up, but never got around to it. Maybe someday. Finally, the 2 most recent games I picked up when I was cleaning Josh's game room last year. He decided he didn't want them, and my game hoarding mentality kicked in, so I volunteered to take them off his hands. So here's 999, a game I will probably never actually play because it seems way too spooky for me, and Radiant Historia, which I think I got from Josh because I have no recollection of getting it otherwise, and it's not a game I'd heard of previously. Now the moment you've all been waiting for because I hyped it up so hard in the last few videos, the DS Opera browser. I was going through my games with a friend in high school and we agreed to swap my Pokemon Red Rescue team for this thing, because I thought it was just so strange. I had never heard of it, and I had to have it. So for context, the DSi has a built-in Opera browser that will work as long as you're connected to the internet. The original Big DS didn't have this feature, and instead, Nintendo and Opera released it as a standalone cartridge-based browser. This one you had to order online. For the DS Lite, they still had a separate browser cartridge you could buy, but this one they released in stores. To use it, you also had to have this memory expansion unit inserted into the GBA slot, and the DS Lite version's memory unit is shaped specially for the system. So, I have the cart-based browser add-on for the DS Lite, and because I never owned a DSi, this was the only way I could access the internet on my DS. Now don't get me wrong, at the time in like 2007, before smartphones were really a thing everyone had, Having a portable browser was really useful. You could log into AIM and MSN and text your buddies on the go. And in fact, this feature ended up being a really great survival tool for me in my difficult teenage years. But also, these were the days before HTML5, when mobile sites were stripped down crappy versions of the real internet. You couldn't watch videos, and you couldn't even connect with WPA encryption. It's funny to even think about the compromises we used to have to make to access the internet outside of our homes. Now everyone just has access to whatever they want whenever they want. A solid improvement, I gotta say. Apparently this memory expansion unit can also be used with homebrew software, so that's pretty neat. But who needs homebrew software when you have the DS Action Replay? As far as commercial cheating devices go, this is probably the most user-friendly and least clunky I've ever used. Again, this seems to be a running theme, but for some reason I have 2 of them. And on top of that, 1 mini DVD, but I can't tell you if I've ever used that. I did use the Action Replay though, a lot. A few viewers noticed in the footage of my Diamond and Pearl review that I happen to have a lot of rare candies in my pockets. Rest assured though, this is the footage I recorded a long time ago in 2013 for what I thought would be the Diamond and Pearl review, years and years ago. And it was not the playthrough that I took notes for the actual chart in the final review in 2017. A bit confusing, but I didn't record new footage for the new review because I already had this old stuff archived and it would have been a lot of unnecessary extra work. A lot of kindness on the part of my viewers, friends, and past sponsors was involved in building this collection, so I was really excited to talk about it. There's a lot of joy in this library. It reminds me a lot of the people I shared these games with, and the viewers who cared about me enough to send stuff in, so it makes me really happy to look back on it. I spent a lot of my gaming life very lonely, with games filling the place of relationships I didn't have, and suddenly I wasn't alone anymore. These were not very good years of my life outside of gaming, which made these games precious comforts to me during that time, and in a lot of ways they were how I survived it all. It's hard not to get sentimental about the DS, even more so than the GBA, so I just want to say thank you to everyone who was there for me, either as a viewer or a friend in that time. These years were hard, but they set me up to do a lot better for the rest of my life. And it's hard to feel sorry for myself when I look at how many people supported me along the way. Thanks for watching, and tune in next time to see more of my weird collection. See ya!